everyone, so in today's video I'm going to be doing something a little bit different, and I'm actually going to be talking about all of my books. So I kind of noticed while sweeping through all of my platforms that I don't really have a space that is dedicated towards just talking about my project. So I thought this would be a good video to make for both my blog and for this channel, just so you guys can have something to reference for what I'm talking about. I'm going to be including all of my books. I'll get into that in a bit. So a lot of these are really embarrassing. You'll see I wrote a majority of these when I was 12 and 13, so don't take it too seriously. This is more supposed to be a lighthearted video where I'm making fun of myself. This video is going to be all about me talking about all of my novels, even though no one asked. So like I mentioned, I'm going to be including my novels. So before I actually wrote my first novel, I wrote 3, I guess they would count as novellas because they're actually not novel length. They're all, I think, under 15K. With that said, I'm going to just be talking about them because they actually did kickstart my journey into writing. I did write them with the intention of them being novels, I just couldn't for some reason hit word count at all. So the first project that I'm going to be talking about today doesn't actually have a name, and I just call it, this is like so embarrassing, I call it by the characters' names Sophie and Jake because I didn't have a title for it, and that's just what I know it as, and literally there's nothing important enough in the book to use as the title. First, I thought it'd be cool to sort of go over like how old I was when I wrote this book. I was 12, so that means I was in grade 7 when I wrote this. It was in June, and my sister had come up to me and she was like, I really want to write a book. And I was like, great, I want to do that. I immediately got a notebook and I started writing, and I have not looked back since then. So this was the project that I first started writing. It's a dystopian young adult story, and of course, dystopian was really big when I was in grade 7. It was 2014. So I did write down some notes about everything in this notebook. So I'm gonna just stare at this. Hopefully that doesn't annoy anybody. Sophie and Jake is about an 18-year-old assassin named Sophie who sets out to perform a hit on another teen and subsequently falls in love with him. I feel like at the time the idea was like super original, but I feel like I've seen that a lot now. Yeah, I definitely thought it was so creative. I don't have a word count for it because this is it. If you can see, May to June 2014. This is actually the entire book. It doesn't even fill up the whole notebook, so I'm gonna assume it's less than 10,000 words. It's probably less than 5,000 words, to be honest. So this is probably like a short story at this point. I've been working on sort of typing it, but it's just so painful to read that I think I've gotten halfway, and I think it's like maybe, I didn't check before this video. I'll put the number. And fun fact about me, when I was younger, I thought for some reason that writing in a notebook was a lot more secure than writing in my computer. And at the time I did have a laptop, I believe, but I didn't really use it. I only used it for like schoolwork, and I was really paranoid that my parents were gonna find my work and read it, and I really didn't want them to. So I was like, if I have a notebook and I write it in the notebook, no one is gonna find it, ever. Of course people found it, but like my family's pretty cool. I don't think anybody read anything. Thank God. But yeah, that was my mindset back then. So that's why I hand wrote like the first couple of things that I actually wrote. So if you didn't notice the names, so Sophie and Jake were these characters that I had in my head while I used to daydream. So as a child, I used to daydream all the time before I went to bed because it would actually help me fall asleep. So I would just sort of come up with multiple storylines. Like there were a million storylines with these two characters. It felt kind of natural at the time when I was 12 just to sort of include them as the characters for this new book that I was working on. I also wanted to include some inspirations for each book. So for this particular story, just to get you guys in the mindset of what I was thinking when I was writing it, a definite influence of mine when I was 12 for all of my writing was Legend by Marie Lu, just this trilogy. I wouldn't be surprised if it's basically legend fanfiction. I don't read dystopian young adult or really much young adult anymore, but it was such an important part of my life, dystopian young adult. I just absolutely loved it, and I gobbled it up so quickly, even though I didn't read that much as a child. The next project that I'm going to be talking about is called The Dreamer. But this here is The Dreamer. This is the original manuscript, and as you can see, it's like a folder, a little duotang. Like, who uses duotang? So I wrote this right after I wrote Sophie and Jake, so I was still probably in grade 7. It was like the last month of grade 7. If not, it was like at the beginning of summer. This is the summary. I just wrote these blurbs, by the way, so you can judge me, because I literally just wrote these, and they're horrible. But 18-year-old Drew is a dreamer, a human mutation with gold blood whose dreams are deadly. After encountering a vicious group of rogue siblings who know all too much about losing a loved one to a dreamer, she goes on the run, but not before falling in love with Lake. Ooh. That name. 2 problems. He's a human, and his siblings are trying to kill her. The Dreamer. Buy it. 2020, guys, it's coming out. This story, like, meant a lot to me because I wrote it for the majority of the summer. Like, when I link back the summer of 2014, which was the summer before I started grade 8, I think about this story a lot because this story was just iconic for me because I wrote it throughout the entire summer, and like a lot of music that I listened to in that summer I associated with this story, which is really interesting. So this clocks in at around 13k words, so it's substantially longer than Sophie and Jake. I actually wrote 3 drafts of it. This is the first draft. An inspiration for The Dreamer was definitely The Host by Stephanie Meyer. This isn't actually the copy that I read. I just had an obsession with collecting these. I think I had 5 of these at one point. Yeah, definitely a huge inspiration for me. I just loved the characters and I liked the dynamics, so a lot of that definitely transferred over. I was very impressionable as a writer in my beginning couple of years. So the third story I'm going to be talking about is The Treated, and this is the last mini story of all the novels, but like this is the cover. So The Treated is, you guessed it, another dystopian YA, and I also wrote it again when I was 12. So the summer when I was 12 in my grade 8 year, I wrote the most that I ever have written in my entire life. This story clocks in at around 14k words, so at the time my longest story. It is about 18-year-old Meg is not one of the treated. In fact, she evades the procedure that strips you of your smile for good because she's one of the rare ones, a ratus. Someone equally resistant to both the cold and warm. After being betrayed by her best friend, she escapes the city and meets Holden, and the two set out to break norms and conquer their fears. This sounds so cheesy, but that's literally what it's about. I was like, I couldn't make a way to sound, like, I couldn't try to make this sound better than it actually is, because that's exactly what it's about. So, she lives in the society where when you're 18, you're given a procedure. I can't remember what the procedure is called. It's just the procedure. You know, like in dystopian where you just capitalize a letter. And you would get a device implanted as a little ring with like a gold band on it that would stop you from smiling. But if it didn't work, you could still smile. There's also a categorization system. So this sounds a lot like Divergent, but I actually didn't know anything about Divergent when I wrote this. But yeah, so there's a classification system. I can't remember the names, but you could either be somebody who's susceptible to cold or susceptible to hot. And if you were like a ratus, you were like okay with both. And so she's one of those. Literally, this is Divergent. Like, I could have had a bestseller. I had a lot of fun writing it, though. I can't remember how long it took me to write. Probably a month, maybe less than a month. And I didn't have any inspirations for this one because maybe it was probably just legend again, because I wrote it in such quick succession with the other ones. So the next book that I'm going to talk about today is actually my first real book. At the time, a book, like some websites said that a book could be 40k words. I know the norm right now is 50. This is around 45, so I don't know whether or not I could actually count this, but I do count it as my first book. Perks and Drawbacks is actually my first YA contemporary novel, and it is the first contemporary thing I've ever written. And I wrote it when I was 12 to 13, so I started it in the summer when I was 12, towards the end of the summer, like start August maybe, and I finished it in November, I believe. So it's about 17-year-old Star Miller is the new kid. Again. After moving to a new school 3 months before graduation, she's surprised to make a friend in anyone, especially not a ragtag group comprised of a rainbow van-driving hippie, creeper boot-wearing goth, math genius, and brooding resident asshole. She's certainly not expecting to fall in love with him either. Does that make any sense? So it's literally about, like, I think it's 5 or 6 friends. I can't even remember at this point. and it's just their story about them in high school, because I thought I had such a good idea of what it was actually like to be in high school, and I really didn't, because this ain't it. The inspiration for this book was actually a Wattpad book, and I didn't really read much Wattpad, but I don't know how I found this, to be honest, but the inspiration was, it all started with an apple by Ashley Winters. So now we're going to get into the territory of the good books, so we just had to get over that hump. So the next book that I'm going to be talking about is actually called Fostered, and Fostered is the series that I'm still working on right now, so if you couldn't tell, this turned out a lot better than the other ones. This is the second cover. I don't know where the original one is. If I can find a picture of the books, I'll put it here, because I know I have a picture of the books together, like the original covers of Fostered and Book 2. But I love Fostered. Fostered has been here for me, and thankfully, at last, I have a book that isn't absolutely horrendous. And I'm excited to talk to you about this one, because I feel like this will actually be helpful for future videos, since I talk a lot about this series. I'm working on the 6th book. This is the first. So Fostered is actually another young adult dystopian, and so I went back to my dystopian roots, except this one is a lot better. And it's a lot less cliche. I don't know what happened. I just went from writing absolute garbage. Fostered isn't any good, but it has an arc to it. So I wrote Fostered when I was 13. And I started writing it on October 2nd. So I just turned 13. My birthday is on September 27th. So I just turned 13, and I got this idea through a dream. And it was a scene of a girl sitting in a bathtub, but I could see this girl. I knew I had to include that scene somewhere, and that's actually in the climax of the novel. I don't usually get ideas from dreams, but this whole series started with a dream. So I actually have the blurb here. It's on the back, and I don't mind this blurb because it's super dramatic. She was fostered for a crime she didn't commit. Punished in brutal foster homes with no chance of escape, until now. Now a year after an accident that stole all connections with her allies, along with her memory, she's doing whatever it takes to survive, at all costs. But as her past slowly starts to resurface, and the new additions to her life add to the intrigue, she starts to wonder what really happened that night. Basically, the Fostered books center around these foster homes. The foster homes are more like places where, like, kids who were criminals went instead of going to jail, or, like, kids who didn't have families. Like, I have the 3 main characters that you definitely want to get to know. Reeve, who was sent to a foster home when she was 11 by her mother. Harrison, who is being very enigmatic about why he was at a foster. Boyd's lying about that, but he was eventually let go by his foster parents, and then Foster, which is very confusing because the title, but ended up at a foster home because his parents just couldn't take care of him when he was a baby. Wow, look at that. So those are the 3 main characters, and Fostered isn't named after Foster, like, Foster is named Foster because it's a nickname. I don't know what my thought process was when I was 13, but this book meant a lot to me in my grade 8 year. I wrote it from October of 2014 to January of 2015. I finished on the 3rd of January and started it on the 2nd of October. This book meant a lot to me, and the series still means a lot to me because I'm still writing it. Even though it went in a very different direction, which I'll continue to talk about. So it did start off as a dystopian, and I just wanted to talk about a few of the influences because I think that'll help a lot more in the explanation. The biggest influence of Fostered is actually The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. At this point, I would definitely say the books are nothing like The Darkest Minds, first of all, because book 6 is not even young adult anymore, which I will talk about later. I think that's basically all you need to know about it. Another inspiration was Slated by Terry. So I read this in grade 8, I think, or I think I read it in grade 7. But this one didn't particularly inspire me to write the book, but it definitely inspired me to create a dystopian world in this manner. So a lot of the dystopians that I was writing had, like, a universe, like, that was separate to our own world, that was very different. And that kind of inspired my story, because my story takes place basically in modern times. And the word count on Fostered, I think, is around 85k. So the next book I'm actually going to talk about, I don't have a physical copy on me. I do own it, though. I called this book This Is Where the End Starts, though I think I meant to call it The End Starts Here, and then I put the wrong title on the front cover, like a smart person. This book is actually the book I didn't finish, and that's the book that I just didn't finish. I'm almost at the end. I feel like it would be kind of unfair to not include it because it does count to me as one of my novels, right? So this is where the end starts. Is about 17-year-old Quinn is a writer. When her character comes to life, she thinks this is the worst of her problems until she starts falling in love with him. I would say it's more of a friendship story at this point. I'm just friend-zoning them. It was so much better as a friendship story. I don't know what I was thinking with the romance plot. I started drafting it in November, I think. Yeah, November 26th of 2014. And I stopped writing it around March, I think, of 2015. It's very low-key. It's contemporary. So that's all I have to say about that. It was just... it's pretty cute, I guess. I drew Quinn. I'll put the speed paint in the description box. I'll put it in the cards too, where I think the card's gonna be over here. The next book I'm gonna be talking about is Hunted. So this is book 2 of Fostered. I like calling it book 2 because I hate this title and it embarrasses me to say. So I'm gonna refer to it as book 2. But yes, so I started writing this, I think, in January, very soon after I finished Fostered, and I finished it, I believe, in May. So it's around 90,000 words. It's still dystopian. And this one, I'll read what it's about. So after Reeve, Harrison, and Foster reunite, post-separating at the end of Fostered, they realize quickly that they aren't in the clear. Now being hunted by a vicious group led by enigmatic Lonan, they're truly tested in what it means to stick together. So this is the book where I introduced Lonan. That's all you need to know. Very important. I can't believe I went a whole book without writing with him in this series. So this is the book he's introduced in. If you wanted to know a bit of more in-depth, at the end of Foster, the group separates. You don't really know that until the beginning of book 2, but the group separates. So Foster, Reeve, and Harrison separate at the end of book 1. And Harrison actually joins the government, you know, the ominous government. Harrison joins the government because probably he wants money, but actually because he's trying to protect Foster and Reeve. So he gets to know Lonan, and that's when they meet. They finally sort of convince Harrison to be like, don't be with the government is bad, come back to us. So Harrison goes back to them. He was always planning to do that. He was just like the leader, the alpha male of the group. He was really like protective of his little babies. He eventually comes back, and the whole book is them being hunted by Lonan's group, which is really funny. So the next book I actually wrote was book 3. Where is it? 3 of Fostered, and that's called Resisted, and it's very big. And if you noticed that, it's actually because I planned on Fostered being a trilogy. I didn't plan on expanding it past a trilogy. I thought by the time I was 17, I'd be writing something else, but still writing stupid series. Because I just kept writing it. I was like, I'll just put everything in this book. It doesn't really matter if it has an arc. I'm never publishing this anyway. So I just put it all in this book. This is actually 200,000 words. Hunted, if you were wondering, was 94,000 words, I think. It could have definitely probably been split into a couple books, but book 3 is actually my favorite book in the entire Fostered series. It just has so much great group dynamic. Lonan really plays a bigger part. This is when you find out that Lonan is actually Reeve's brother, which is, ooh, girl, that build-up. So I wrote it in the summer of 2015. I started writing it in May, and it actually took me a very long time to finish. I took a break from it in October, and I finished it probably in the spring. Resisted. A good book. So I was 13 again when I wrote this. I was 13 when I wrote most of the books. So the first 3 books I wrote when I was 13. I technically finished book 3 when I was 14 though. After being captured by Lonan's team, Reeve, Harrison, and Foster cut a deal to work with him in exchange for a criminal pardon. So that's basically what happens. I'm not planning on like editing this series. I don't think it would be worth it, but if you want to hear more about it, I would love to talk about it. So, the next book that I'm going to be talking about, I have so many copies, let me grab them. It actually has 5 book covers. I never ordered the 5th one. This is the most recent one, the white one. And this was the first one, so this is the cover that I think is most iconic. I started writing I'm Disappointed in my grade 8 year in May, May 5th of my grade 8 year, but I stopped writing it during the summer. I didn't feel like writing it anymore. I guess I lost a little bit of momentum. It wasn't really my biggest priority. I was writing mostly Fostered. So I picked it back up when I was in grade 9, when I started high school. And I would say that I was 14 when I wrote I'm Disappointed. I did start it when I was 13, but I wrote the majority of it when I was 14. Clifford Wright is a disappointment to everyone he knows. Struggling with an alcohol addiction and a family that's the definition of unsupportive, he's one wrong word away from heading back to nights of out-of-control drinking, to mornings with a father who does nothing but yell, and a support system that only seems to make everything worse. What a mood. But as far as everyone knows, he has everything under control, until his provoked best friend, the one person trusted with his secret, exposes his alcoholism at a party gone wrong and almost ends up at the bottom of a swimming pool at the hands of Clifford. Now, a year after being sent to rehab for his addiction and depression, he's back to living in a town that does nothing but judge him. Isolated in his mind, he only wants 3 things: make it through his last year of high school, focus on his music career, and stay out of the spotlight. However, when he trips Sydney Hart at school, his plan of going it alone through senior year comes to an unexpected halt. Because suddenly, he's not thinking about leaving his town and never coming back. He's thinking about the girl who sees him as the somewhat awkward, aspiring musician he is, and not just a disappointment. And without warning, Clifford starts to fall for the girl whose stepfather sent him to rehab. Girl. But things aren't looking up for them both. After a huge family fight breaks out and she's stuck living with him, Clifford realizes that Sydney is not the carefree girl he once thought she was. With a hospitalized mother, stepfather who won't get off her back, and a dead brother she refuses to talk about, their issues start to intermingle. And just as his sobriety is no longer an issue, everything starts falling back apart. Soon, Clifford starts to wonder if he can bear the weight of his problems without crushing himself, his progress with his addiction, and his relationship in the process. So I'm disappointed. It was a game changer for me, I would say, in the least. It changed a lot for me. It was the first book that I really made an effort to try to get published. I never got to the agenting stage, but I entered it in, I think, 4 or 5 contests. The one I got the farthest in was Teen Pit, which I entered in 2017, so I was in grade 10, I was 15. I placed in that, I can't remember where I placed, I was in the top 10 for that, and then right after that contest, it just hit me that I didn't want to work on this book anymore, and I didn't want to try to get it published. The inspiration for this book, I would say, was definitely All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. All the Bright Places really inspired me to write with a male narrator. No longer working on it anymore, and I don't plan to actually do anything with it anymore. I think it's better to just leave it in the past. But it did mean a lot to me, and it was a book that I really enjoyed working on. Like, especially my friend Soto, she was there when I was revising for Pitch Wars. She was so supportive while I was editing, which was great. That was very special to me. Whenever I think of I'm disappointed, I think of the summer I edited it for Pitch Wars, and she was there with me every step of the road. So thank you, Soto. You're like the best. I think it went through 9 or 10 drafts. My sister, I owe everything to her, basically. She helped me really get that book into shape. At one point, I think the original draft ended at 90K. The second draft brought it up to 120, and finally, like the 10th draft, I got it down to like 83,000 words, if you were wondering. So after I'm disappointed, I actually worked on book 4 of the Fostered series. I have a video on making this cover hollowed. It's very ugly in person. I don't know. It's just so contrasty. I wish it didn't look like this, but it's fine. The spine is kind of cute. Looks like ice cream. Nothing too special about Hollowed, to be honest. This is the one I don't like the most. This is my least favorite Fostered book. It's just so dramatic. I wrote this book when I was in grade 10. I started it the summer before grade 10. So I was 15, and I would say this is where the story started to change. So it went from very dystopian to a lot less dystopian in book 4. When Reeve winds up in a foster home again, the gang must come together to help her mend her broken pieces, because a couple of horrible things happen in book 4. So she meets Lincoln, who she ends up having a very abusive relationship with. This is the start of all of that. That's where she meets him in this book. So that was very pivotal in sort of changing the direction of the plot. At this point, I was getting a lot older. My taste with books was changing. I was in a really weird phase. So this is definitely a pivotal book. My least favorite, but a pivotal one. So that book clocks in at 114,000 words, if you were wondering. So the next book that I wrote after this was book 5 of Fostered, and that is Splintered. So I also have a video on making this cover. Splintered is semi-dystopian-y, YA questionable. This is when I started to get more lit-ficky with how I was writing. I would still qualify Splintered as genre. Nothing wrong with genre at all. but I was definitely changing my style very slightly. A few of the passages are a little bit more lit-ficky. I don't like this book as much because the writing is a little awkward. This is when I started to get a lot darker with my content and sort of play around with non-conventional sort of plot lines and stuff like that. So I wrote it when I was 16. I wrote Splintered between grade 10 and the very beginning of grade 11. So that one is about the gang reaches some level of normality. So they're literally like underground, having a normal life. Finally. No one's like being hunted by anyone. Like, it has no plot. This is basically the start of when the books have no plot. That book clocked in at 157,000 words. The last book that I'm actually going to be talking about today is the one I'm working on currently, and that is book 6 of Fostered. It's called Rewired. I really want to change the title for this book because I like it so much better than the other ones because it's really what I want to be writing at the moment. However, I'm just keeping them titled the weird verb. I don't know what past tense verb for consistency's sake. Rewired is like definitely adult lit fic. The beginning is not lit fic, it's more a little bit more like ornate writing, but where I'm at right now from probably 30k in is definitely adult lit fic. I wrote this book starting 17, so I'm currently writing it 16, 17. I actually started writing it in grade 11. I'm currently almost done grade 12. So there's not much to explain. If you guys want to keep updated with Rewired, I post updates ever so often on my blog, so I'll link my blog down below. I have a Fostered tab, so check out the Fostered tab for updates on Rewired. That's the book that I'm going to have most of my vlogs on, since I'm working on it. As for inspirations for that book, The Girls by Emma Cline changed the game for me. I think I only learned how to write when I read this book. There's this chapter that I wrote in March break, and I finished this book in March break, and that's just when my writing style just completely changed. It evolved. So The Girls by Emma Cline is what I refer to when I'm in a funk, because it is seriously so inspirational for me. So while like plot-wise, definitely character-wise, no, the actual writing of it really inspired me for Rewired. So that's it for all of my books. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it was super long. Like, the raw footage right now is 50 minutes long, almost a whole hour. But I thought this would be an interesting video to put out because I wanted you guys to have some sort of a sense of a starting point. I hope this was entertaining to you guys, at least. If you want to see me read from these books, let me know. I'll like put on my best audiobook narrator voice like I do. But for now, I'm gonna go study for an exam, finish the semester, do some writing maybe, and thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!
St. Christopher to find your sister. She